Episode 1 of Reacher Season 3 starts with us in Abbotsville, Maine. Reacher arrives at a local record store intending to sell his vinyl. However, he's immediately distracted when a man is kidnapped in broad daylight. Reacher manages to save the kid, bundling him in the van to leave. Reacher's instincts inevitably kick in and he winds up shooting a cop as they arrive on the scene. As we soon find out, this kid's name is Richard Beck, and right now, Reacher works to try and evade the campus police. He switches cars and tells the kid to beat it, but Richie won't leave so easy. Apparently this isn't the first time he's been kidnapped, and given he has a rich father, he seems like an easy target. Apparently Richie's father is just a rug importer with generational wealth, but it's enough to pique Reacher's interest and he agrees to take the kid home. With a lot of security at the gates, including head of security Chapman Duke and a hot-headed slab of muscle called Paulie, Reacher suspects that there's more here than meets the eye. It doesn't take long for him to meet Zachary Beck, Richard's father. He has guns pinned up on the wall and visibly flaunts his wealth. Reacher, meanwhile, immediately throws shade at Richard's security detail. It doesn't take long for Zachary to run Reacher's prints and he proceeds to rattle off Reacher's impressive resume. Turns out Paulie doesn't take too kindly to army officers, and we soon learn why later on in the series. Nobody seems to know who Reacher is, but Zachary wants to hire him. Given these guys know what Reacher has done, i.e. killing the cop, he doesn't really have much of a choice. Beck decides to test his loyalty with a game of Russian roulette, and while Reacher believes the one bullet in the chamber is a dud, turns out it's actually genuine. Although Reacher does make the team, he's locked down until the morning. And as we soon find out, this is all part of his master plan. He brings someone called Susan Duffy and lets her know that he's in. We then cut back several days where Reacher is staking out Quinn, and it doesn't take long for the cops to catch up, specifically Federal Agent Susan Duffy. She knows what he's up to and wants his help, specifically to investigate a rug importer. Several weeks back, a high-level LA-based drug dealer flew to Maine for a meeting with the owner of Bizarre Bazaar. This isn't exactly procedure, and it would appear that Zachary Beck is dirty. Reacher wants something in return for helping though. He wants Quinn. With the deal in place, Duffy reveals that Quinn is still alive and was saved after falling off a cliff. Now, Reacher saw Quinn in Beck's car with the initial pictures shown to him earlier on, and that explains why he's agreed to see the feds again and work with them on this operation. It turns out Duffy has struggled to nail both the dealer or Beck, and so she initially turned towards an informant by the name of Teresa Daniels. Teresa managed to get a job working at Beck's warehouse, but lately she's gone dark. A week back she just fell off the radar, and while Bizarre Bazaar claimed that she never showed up at work, Duffy is concerned that she may well have been killed. She also used to wear huge earrings, which could be a factor later on. Now, Reacher and the gang concoct a fake kidnapping in order for Reacher to swoop in and save the day. The cop Reacher shot at the start of the episode actually happens to be one of the officers undercover. It was all a ploy to get Reacher through the front door. In fact, Reacher was even the one who suggested using live ammo, while the campus police were actually a genuine element in all of this. At this point, we then cut back to the present. Reacher marked his gun earlier on, so playing Russian roulette wasn't so bad, given he was always in control. Meanwhile, Duffy has John Cooper, one of the security guards, in for questioning, but he's tight-lipped and not revealing anything. As for Reacher, he finds a hidden cellar, and that night he sneaks out to investigate. Checking inside, Reacher finds an unmade bed, half-eaten food, and, more concerning, a hoop earring. As a result, there's one pressing question: where is Teresa? Episode 2 of Reacher Season 3 starts with our titular character confirming that Teresa has been moved off campus. It would appear this has taken place away from the cameras, and while there's no blood in the basement, Reacher is convinced that Teresa is being used as leverage by Quinn and Beck. But to what end? Unfortunately, Reacher is forced to hide when a car shows up. It's Beck, and he seems to be talking to a shady guy called Angel. As Reacher makes his way back to his room, Duffy questions Cooper, whom they kidnapped for questioning last episode of course, about Teresa. Duffy is hot-headed and eventually pulled off him by Billy, the other officer on duty here. He reminds Duffy that they're detaining this guy illegally and he could sing and blow their entire operation. They need to be careful. Reacher makes it back to his room just in time, as Duke shows and explains that he needs to get moving. They found the pickup that the kidnappers used, and this Angel character is going to take Reacher to this lot, which is located 90 miles south of their current location. Their plan is to ID the truck. Reacher hurriedly lets Duffy know about this, given Beck is under the assumption that a grenade went off inside the bodyguard's car. It didn't, of course, so the fact that a car is going to be squeaky clean, rather than having blood all over it, is immediately going to blow their cover, unless she moves fast and stages the scene to keep their story tight. Reacher stalls for time, while Duffy tries to move the cars, including a pretty humorous scene where Reacher just stares at a clock while pretending to make himself some coffee. Duffy meanwhile tries to move the car, but it's pinned in. Her plan seems to go completely tits up, and both Angel and Reacher arrive at the impound lot before Duffy is done. Angel is a bit trigger happy and looks like he could well kill the officer at the reception, but Reacher helps him out by knocking the guy down with a single punch. Although he and Angel find the bodyguard's car, quick thinking and a change of license plate works to fool Angel into thinking this is just the exact same model, make and accident, but taking place in a different state. And wouldn't you know it, it works like a charm. A sleepless night for Reacher leads to a sleep-deprived morning, as Reacher heads back and is tasked by Beck to go and see Paulie and Duke for his next task. After a bit of shit talking and pranking in the gym, the trio eventually head out. Reacher is next tasked with a delivery job, ferrying some rugs to New London. Reacher knows he's on a tight window of time and he's not able to stop for too long. However, this could be their one window of time to figure out what's inside the truck. After ringing Duffy to let her know, Reacher next contacts Francis Neagley. He needs her help to run the backgrounds for the goons working with Beck, which she agrees to just as they pull into the truck stop. Duffy is here, and inside the truck they find nothing but rugs. They get confirmation of this from Duffy's associate, a guy called Dick who happens to have a drug-trained canine. Back on the road, Duffy has done her homework and learned that Beck has high-profile contacts. His shipments get searched 10 times less than anybody else's, meaning he may well have someone from customs on his payroll. It's also clear here that Beck is working for someone higher on the chain of command, and we're led to believe that this person is Quinn. After ferrying the rugs to their destination, Reacher shows up at the warehouse where Angel is waiting for him. Turns out that story in the impound didn't actually fool him, and he's been tracking Reacher the whole time. Duke is on the way too, but Angel wants to have a word first. He's not quite the loudmouth idiot we thought, and he calls out Reacher for inconsistencies with his story, including knocking out the impound worker and the hot wiring gig. Unfortunately for Angel, he talks a bit too much, and Reacher is forced to kill the guy, before quite literally stuffing him under the desk. He tells Duke that Angel talks too much when he shows up, and the pair leave the warehouse together, which is where episode 2 comes to an end. Episode 3 of Reacher Season 3 starts with Reacher and Duke heading back to Beck's place together. Duke does ask about Angel a little, but doesn't pry too much, with Duke aware that this little weasel is always trying to jump the chain of command. Back inside the house, Reacher speaks to Annette, the cleaner who was sniffing around inside his room last episode. Here Reacher learns that there's a mechanic on their staff 24/7, and he also catches wind that there's something about a 50th birthday party for someone rich, which could come into play later on. Annette though is pretty innocent in all of this, given she's just here to try and pay her tuition, and Beck pays pretty well, so she doesn't ask too many questions. For now, Reacher needs to see Beck, who has questions for Reacher. His description of the kidnapper doesn't match what they found through their investigation, so Reacher improvises and makes it up as he goes along, pointing out that his gang are clearly laying low before making their next move. It seems to work, and Reacher is eventually dismissed. Upstairs though, we learn a bit more about those who work with Beck. Neagley rings again, and through her we learn Paulie was discharged from the army for punching his captain's eye clean out of its socket, while he also tore off a CO's finger too. As for Angel, he did 8 years in the brig, sharing time with Paulie for sexually assaulting a female lieutenant. So what of Chapman Duke, the head of security? Well, he was a former cop, but he's now obviously turned to a criminal lackey, and his rap sheet is pretty extensive. There are some nasty people here, and of course that's all topped off by Quinn too. When Neagley finds out what Reacher is up against, she knows he needs backup. As for Reacher, he sneaks out that night after a bit of shut-eye, intending to clean up the mess he's made at the warehouse. Making his way there, Duffy decides to join him. They begin searching through the various crates to try and find Teresa, but she doesn't appear to be there. Instead, they stuff Angel inside one of the shipping containers outside. Unfortunately, 2 workers arrive ready to meet Angel, but instead find themselves in the presence of Reacher and Duffy. The pair work to subdue the goons, stuffing them in another container. Man, Reacher is just going to fill up every container with Beck's goons, right? Anyway, with confirmation that Teresa isn't here, Reacher heads back to the mansion. In the morning though, the place is abuzz as there's a big operation about to go down. Of course, the drivers haven't shown up for work, but Reacher offers to help. Instead though, he's pushed aside onto shopping detail with Richie. Whilst out and about, Rich reveals that Paulie is only here because of someone called Julius McCabe. This is actually Beck's boss, who's the real person pulling the strings here. Reacher needs to get promoted, so there's no better way to do that than to become Beck's number 2. Part of this, however, will include getting rid of Duke. Duffy and Reacher work together and orchestrate a plan, including giving Beck a tip-off about a local gang hanging at a secluded empty house. All of this is done through Angel's email to make everything look legit. After setting this up, Reacher dispatches a couple of bullies with a massive chip on their shoulder, who come after Rich. Given Beck's operation has put their families out of business, they want revenge. Following this altercation, Rich opens up to Reacher, pointing out that he has dreams to leave and never look back. Reacher obviously knows a thing or two about hitting the road and promises to get him there, but only if he opens up about Beck's business and what's really going on here. This works to loosen the kid's lips, and Richie explains that Julius McCabe is the ringleader and Beck works for him. Paulie is not actually here to protect Rich, but instead to give Julius an easy entry point to get to Rich if his father steps out of line. McCabe is the one who initially kidnapped Richie too, and in particular it was Paulie who beat the crap out of him and left him locked in the trunk for days. All of this done under McCabe's command. Initially, Beck ran a tight operation and a completely legal one too. He managed to find loopholes around customs, paying off officials to lower down charges or just making them look the other way. Unfortunately, McCabe caught wind of this thanks to Zachary bragging about his operation and made a move for the business, kidnapping Richard and forcing Zachary to play ball. While this is going on, Duffy learns about a shipment inbound to the dock after earlier infiltrating Angel's email. Duffy and Villy head to the dock where they stake out McCabe's operation. Paulie is there overseeing everything, and of course Quinn shows up too, but he's under the alias of Julius McCabe. Elsewhere, Cooper makes his move and looks set to escape after duping Elliot, the rookie officer on babysitting duties, into patching up a self-inflicted wound. After dropping off Rich back home, Reacher is off again to this house in Hartford. Just before they go, Reacher grabs a gun from the dock, which we later find out is actually Angel's side piece. Something tells me he's probably going to need it. Anyway, Reacher and Duke head out into the woods, armed to the teeth, and head to this secluded house. Of course, all of this is a ruse to get Duke alone in order to take him out. Getting nothing from the guy, Reacher kills Duke before staging the scene to make it look like a shooting, before eventually blowing the place sky high. With the evidence destroyed in a huge explosion, Reacher rushes back to Beck and hands over Angel's gun. Given Beck's extensive collection, he obviously knows his weapons and immediately recognizes it, and believes Angel was dirty and playing them this whole time. Reacher goes on to explain those truck drivers were in on it too, explaining their absence. All of this also works a treat, with Reacher promoted up to becoming Beck's right-hand man, and as the episode closes out, we cut across to Reacher, who has a wry little grin on his face. Episode 4 of Reacher Season 3 starts with Beck driving back home with Reacher. He's now the new lieutenant here, and he manages to slip away under the pretense of getting food as a way of catching up with Duffy and Villy. Reacher brings up the safe house explosion and the collateral damage, believing Duffy can chalk it up to some sort of bureaucratic gig. Duffy isn't particularly happy when she finds out, but in exchange Reacher sees the pictures she's taken and sees for himself that Julius McCabe is definitely Quinn. Duffy wants to know all the ins and outs of who they're dealing with here, so Reacher explains what Quinn's connection to him is. Back during his army days, Reacher winds up with a new assistant in the form of Dominic Cole. He's working on an espionage case involving top secret weapons design blueprints being sold by a specialist called Gorowski. Dominic promises that he won't regret taking her on, and she immediately shows her stuff. Turns out Gorowski was coerced into making dead drops in the park, and the pair head out to stake the place, watching all of this go down. Nobody else shows though, and the pair realise they've been duped with a misdirect. Turns out the real drop here happened with a newspaper in an adjacent bin, blocked by the garbage truck. Despite not having anything concrete to go on, Reacher decides they should bring in Gorowski and put some heat on him. It works too, and he eventually breaks. Apparently he was initially approached by Quinn, who took his 4-year-old daughter overnight just to show that he could. Of course, this brings Reacher and Dominique onto the case of Quinn, whom they realise has a history of selling military secrets to different individuals. The latest is a Syrian national and government agent by the name of Safwan Qasim. Reacher takes his partner under his wing, guiding her on how to handle this while also letting her lead the case. Carl and Reacher show to see Safwan and demand he play ball to bring Quinn in for questioning. Now, with Safwan and Gorosky on their side, all they need is their middleman to nail the case and make this happen. The operation goes ahead as planned, with Quinn filmed with a backdrop exchanging military secrets for a ton of money. With all the evidence that they need, all that's left is to make the arrest. Reacher looks out for Dominique here, pointing out that she took the lead in this investigation, so she should be the one to arrest him and bask in the glory. However, that night Dominique doesn't get in touch, prompting Reacher to message her. Unfortunately, when he shows up at Quinn's, he learns that Dom has been killed, hung by the rafters in a barn, tortured and killed. Reacher is understandably angry here and finds Quinn not long after. After holding him up at gunpoint, Quinn reveals that he's been working with Dominique this whole time. It's all a ruse though, and Reacher doesn't fall for it. Instead, he leads Quinn over to the edge of a cliff overlooking rapids and proceeds to shoot him in the head. But as we know, this obviously doesn't kill him. Police soon show at the scene and Reacher lies, claiming that Quinn was gone when he arrived. Since we're on story time this episode, back in the present, Duffy reveals the whole story on her part. Turns out Teresa didn't actually go undercover willingly. Duffy threatened her with a prison sentence, and she made up a story that the DA who prosecuted her boyfriend on drug charges felt that Teresa held back on her testimony so he'd get a lighter sentence and wanted Teresa to go down. This explains why Duffy is so adamant on nailing this case, giving them some guilt in common. Reacher returns to the house here and, after being gifted some new clothes from Annette, heads outside where he finds Richard hitting the punching bag. Reacher offers him some help to teach the kid how to fight. Reacher also learns here from Beck that Angel's laptop has a tracking app on it, which has been taken from the warehouse. Furthermore, it also has all the shipping schedules on, and it's actually showing that it's at a commercial tubing facility that they own. Now, as fate would have it, this also happens to be the same place that Duffy and Billy have shown up to, looking for Teresa. Quinn's men arrive at the facility not long after, leaving things on a big old cliffhanger. Episode 5 of Reacher Season 3 starts with Reacher racing to the warehouse to try and save Duffy and Billy. A shootout inevitably ensues, just as Reacher shows to save them both. Of course, at this point, the men have no idea that Reacher is not working on their side, and this gives him the edge. Within the skirmish, Duffy drops her badge. Reacher knows it will look suspicious if they just get away and Reacher is the last man standing, so he gives Duffy instructions on how to leave. He also warns Duffy about Angel's laptop, telling her to throw it out the window when she drives off. When Duffy and Billy get away, Reacher intentionally sabotages the goon's car, much to the annoyance of this last remaining guy, whose name is Harley. He certainly knows his stuff, and also that Duffy is a federal agent, which he soon reports in when they get back on the road. Now, Harley is pretty heartless and cruel, as evidenced by him boasting to Reacher about a story where he let someone drown rather than shooting them after their spine was broken. He likens his fellow comrades to cannon fodder, not really caring that they're forced to dispose of the bodies by throwing them in the water at the edge of the cliff, just down at the edge of the Beck estate. In fact, he sees this as a perk of the job more than anything else. As far as Harley is concerned, these guys are degenerates. The men brought in to work for Quinn are chronically antisocial and basically unhorrible anywhere else. Honestly, I can't wait for Reacher to kick this guy's ass. Anyway, I digress. Duffy remains optimistic that they'll get a break here, as evidenced by her and Billy splitting up and hitting several more locations the following day. Without the laptop, it seems they may be able to strike lucky, and she feeds all of this back to Reacher, who brings up that he has her badge. However, there are bigger problems to deal with here. McCabe's men show up, swinging their balls around, but Reacher soon puts a stop to that and knocks one of them out with a bone-crunching slam at the table. While Reacher has the badge situation to handle, which he eventually stuffs in his pillowcase, Steven falls for John Cooper's charm and lets him have a smoke. The thing is, he's actually got a mouthful of flammable medicine from the table, and Cooper soon beats the poor agent to a pulp and escapes. When Duffy returns to the cabin, she finds Steven dead. She quickly rings Reacher to let him know, including how their cover is probably blown now. The only solution, if they have time, is to use Billy as a distraction in order to stop John before it's too late. Duffy helps though, destroying the generator so it cuts the power to the whole facility and prevents John from phoning ahead. Quinn gives instructions to Beck to have the whole house searched, believing there's a rat in the midst, while Reacher flips Billy's car on the one road into town. The idea here is obviously to stage a crash, so the only road into the facility is blocked, with John needing to get out and help. He works a tree and Reacher kills Cooper. On his way back, Duffy rings and reveals that she's going to explain everything to the higher-ups when all of this is said and done. It'll cost her job of course, but it's a price she's willing to pay to make things right. Reacher thanks her for the help and returns to Beck's. There he finds that Beck is not happy. He's had the whole house searched and realises they have a Fed in their midst. It's not the badge that they found, thankfully, but they have discovered a secret phone in the maid's room. Turns out Annette was actually working with the ATF this whole time. Reacher offers to talk to her and get some information, but unfortunately Paulie has already said his piece, with his fist for her skull. Reacher is not happy and tries to punch this slab of muscle but comes up short. The man barely flinches and instead he turns right back and punches Reacher in the gut, causing him to cough up blood. Reacher is forced to toss Annette's body after, but he's not particularly happy about it. He does get a cheap shot in against Harley though, so there is that. After he speaks to Duffy and the pair discuss how Quinn's operation appears to be far more geared towards guns and firepower than drugs. This explains why they weren't able to find anything in the truck. Quinn is clearly running a top-rate operation here, including all the bells and whistles needed to do business with anybody who needs guns. In the morning though, Reacher is called out to the warehouse with Beck. Reacher believes that he's en route to meet Quinn and he tells Duffy that if it comes to it, he's quite happy to fight his way out of this. Despite getting past him in Portland and Virginia, Reacher is not about to make that same mistake again. In fact, he's going to try and shoot his way out and escape. Duffy is quick to point out here that this is suicide, and even worse, it could spook them into killing Teresa, if she's still alive. This also means that they'd move their operation on and go, but Reacher believes Teresa is already dead, so this doesn't really matter. Duffy and Billy stake the warehouse out though, just as Reacher shows up to meet Quinn, which is where the episode comes to an end. Episode 6 of Reacher Season 3 starts with our titular character brought to Quinn in his warehouse. Quinn chews into Beck, threatening the guy after the botched operation. He doesn't bat an eyelid at Reacher though, as it would appear Quinn does have amnesia and he doesn't remember the big guy. Furthermore, Quinn also reveals here that Teresa is still alive, the client they're dealing with as a thing for redheads, so Teresa's being used as a deal sweetener with the Russian mob, who happen to be the buyers. They're fronted by a man named Taktarov, and he's certainly in no mood to play games. He's not happy about the delayed shipments and threatens Quinn that things will get ugly if he's not careful. Turns out when Quinn moved his operation back to the East Coast, he needed capital and he did so by going to the Russian mob for a loan. They helped get things set up, i.e. through kidnapping Richard and taking over Beck's business, but now he's in a spot of bother. The thing is, if this deal doesn't go through, then Quinn will be killed. His life literally depends on making this sale happen. Duffy oversees all of this from afar with Billy, and after seeing the green dress taken into the warehouse, she deduces that it may be a good idea to trace this back to the dress shop. He doesn't have the buyer's name, but does have a number, which Duffy gladly takes. However, it could well be a number for a burner, given Duffy attempts to ring and gets nowhere fast. Reacher and Duffy go over the details of the case though, including how they need to learn the time and date that this deal is about to go down. A lot is riding on this, and Teresa will almost certainly be there too. Duffy winds up kissing Reacher in the middle of this, but when Billy shows up, everything goes out the window because Richard, whom Reacher ended up going into town with, spots the cop he shot dead. Whoops. With the cover potentially blown, Reacher speaks to Richard en route back to the house, revealing what's actually going on here. He explains about his mission and the DEA agents, including how he's going to take down Quinn's operation and free Beck from the shackles that he's stuck in. Over in Virginia, McCabe has his men move in on Officer Powell, the man who initially gave Reacher information about Quinn's operation. He's tortured for info and eventually spills the beans about the plates being run on one of their cars. Quinn is livid when he finds out and confronts Beck about this, who learns that Reacher is their mole. In Chicago, assassins jump in to take out Neagley. She manages to hold her own though and learns about the operation, along with the fact that somebody by the name of Kostopoulos sent him. Neagley subdues the guy after telling Reacher about the hit, but it's clear now that Reacher's cover is well and truly blown, and he races out the compound. While he does manage to get away from Beck's estate, as he's forced to go it on foot afterwards. A shootout naturally ensues in the woods until Reacher shoots out the lights on their cars and decides to go stealthy, taking out the guards one at a time. The only one left by the end is Paulie, who follows the signs back into town. Reacher is here, hiding out in the laundrette with the owners for the time being. When Paulie returns to Quinn empty-handed, revealing that Reacher has got away, he decides to relieve some stress by playing a game of Russian roulette. It's pretty tense, especially with Quinn working as the ringleader here, until Beck caves and promises to give Quinn whatever he wants. Meanwhile, Reacher returns to Duffy, where they learn that calls have come in from somewhere called Port Rome. Reacher realizes that this links to the dock and specifically boat owners. That number from before? Well, it turns out it's actually Harley's, and they deduce that this links directly to the Sweet Marie, which happens to be a boat. Duffy and Reacher follow the clues and swim out to the ship, which is just left ominously floating in the middle of the water. It's definitely suspicious, especially when they find evidence that Teresa has been here. It would appear she was tied up and drugged, but when Harley returns, a fight breaks out and the boat is eventually set on fire. With a bit of light persuasion, Harley reveals that he's been paid $1,000 a day to keep Teresa on the boat. Now, Quinn has actually moved her to somewhere new and also reworked his whole operation, including when and where the gun deal is going down. Harley has been told nothing. Content that he's out of useful intel, Duffy and Reacher leave, letting Harley go down with his ship and moving on to the next clue. And where is that? Well, it appears to be in LA. Episode 7 of Reacher Season 3 starts with us in Boston, Massachusetts, with Duffy heading out on an errand, specifically by visiting Teresa's grandmother. There's some great banter here, with Reacher admitting that Duffy just wants him for his body. However, this visit also solidifies one thing: getting Teresa back is a top priority. In Chicago, Illinois, Neagley shows up to see Kostopoulos, who admits that Quinn was the one behind the hit on her. He also brings up his ties to Beck, including confirmation that this isn't the first time Quinn has piggybacked on another family's business. Those guys though didn't have much luck, given they've all ended up dead. And of course, Reacher needs to make sure that Beck and Richard aren't going to follow suit. Duffy and Reacher make it back to LA, where they look over recovered footage of Quinn's men. Duffy used to run surveillance on these guys right back at the start of the operation, and Reacher notices something there that could help. One person in particular who could be a key component to this puzzle is Darian Prado, who owns his own art gallery. He's a pretty shady fella, and he has a prior rap sheet too. Both Duffy and Reacher use that to their advantage, threatening to put him behind bars unless he does them a favour. And of course, he doesn't have much of a choice. Prado rings Beck and organises a meet in Maine, but of course Duffy and Reacher aren't ready to let this go. They bring the authorities in anyway, just to make sure Prado is not going to squeal. In Maine, Beck shows up at the meet spot, where Neagley is there instead of Prado's man. All of this is to keep their cover intact, where, out of earshot for Quinn's men, she convinces Beck to help out, given he and Richard's lives are on the line. Beck doesn't know too much though, but is aware that buyers from Yemen are flying in, and a meet with Quinn will occur somewhere nearby. Billy believes it may be Sanford Regional Airfield, given it's quite a discreet area and the authorities tend to turn a blind eye. However, Beck broaches Quinn for info and learns that the deal was actually going down at the Bullhead Salvage Yard at 9 PM that night. This is actually during Beck's own birthday bash, and Quinn isn't about to let Richard go to the movies or leave the house. Neagley tails the buyers, while Beck rings Reacher and lets him know where the deal is occurring. However, Villy and Duffy want to get the ATF involved, but Reacher knows that he won't be able to get his vengeance on Quinn if they do. Naturally, Duffy overrules him, and ATF jump on this and take over, pushing Duffy and the others aside, just like Reacher thought. Neither Duffy nor Reacher are prepared to leave this to the authorities though, given they've done all the hard graft, and as a result, they prepare an alternate plan while Duffy is allowed to join the troops on the ground. Reacher's plan involves a lovely little sniper rifle where he can pick off Quinn's men one by one from afar. Only there's a problem. Turns out the deal isn't going down at the salvage yard after all, it's occurring at Beck's party. Reacher soon susses that this is the case, and it would appear that this is a trap. But before we find out the ramifications of this and whether Beck survives this ambush, the episode comes to an end. Episode 8 of Reacher Season 3 starts with Reacher coming to the realization that he's walked right into a trap. A whole bunch of armed guards arrive at the yard, but Reacher dives headfirst into the firefight. Duffy is here too, along with the ATF agents rolling in to give a helping hand. After clearing the yard, Reacher and the others set off for the party, with Quinn's men dead and word sent over to Quinn himself confirming that everything has been dealt with. He's none the wiser to the firestorm coming his way. The deal hasn't gone down yet, and unfortunately Reacher is loath to sniper Paulie Luckily, with Neagly's expertise, given gunshots will spook those nearby and blow their cover completely. Now, given Quinn's men were ordered to take the trucks back in order to transport weapons to the buyers, it makes sense to follow the plan but pose as the truckers themselves as they head into the estate. That way they can sneak in undetected, get Richard and Teresa to safety, stop the buyers, and then deal with Quinn. Oh, and of course the huge muscly elephant in the room is Paulie. Reacher decides he's going to handle that one personally. The gang managed to drive the trucks down to the estate, but Paulie catches onto them and it inevitably leads to a big fight breaking out between Reacher and Paulie. When a shell falls on them both, Reacher winds up knocked out and Paulie is the first one up, leading him to wrap a chain around Reacher's neck and string him up off the ground, believing the job is done. Reacher does manage to break free though and stumbles after Paulie, who can't quite believe that the big man is still alive. They fight down to the edge of the estate and eventually tumble into the water below. It's a nice touch given this was foreshadowed earlier in the season, with Harley discussing the riptides and how difficult it is to survive in the water. The pair fight, eventually leading to Reacher coming out on top after hitting Paulie in the throat and watching him fall to the depths. Job done. Well, for a bit anyway. Just like with Paulie, this time it's Reacher's turn to exasperate as Paulie comes out the woods, limping up the road. We've seen the mounted machine gun in the booth a few times across the season, with lingering shots whenever anybody passes the area. This time, Reacher gets the last laugh, having pulled a bullet from the belt and plugging it into the barrel. Paulie grabs the gun and, after a few smart-ass comments, fires the gun and wham, he's killed. At the same time, the others head inside and with Neagly posing as a worker, they manage to suss out where the buyers and Richard are located. Neagly intends to head upstairs, get Richard and Teresa, and get the hell out of there. Now Billy is also here and he gets caught in the bathroom by one of the guards. It prompts a big fight to break out between them, which Richard happens to overhear given it's inside the bathroom above his room. With Paulie dead, inside the house, Duffy manages to find Teresa. However, the Russian buyer also manages to worm his way inside the room, intent on taking advantage of the drugged up girl. Before he can have his way with Teresa, Duffy comes out of hiding and holds him up at gunpoint. Given he's caught quite literally with his pants down, Duffy shoots him in the privates, grabs Teresa and scrambles out the room. It doesn't take long for all hell to break loose at the party and Quinn seizes an opportunity to take off. He holds Richard up at gunpoint, but Beck, sporting the gun that Richard got him for his birthday, shows up and stops his son from dying. Unfortunately, Beck is shot dead within minutes, but he does save his son's life in the process. As Quinn scarpers outside, the Russians, led by Taktarov, show up and immediately grab him. This doesn't go over well with Reacher though, who implores the men to stop what they're doing. A standoff then ensues between the two teams, with Neagly trying to bargain with them all, deciding to switch the money for Quinn. This does the trick, given the Russians only really came here for the money and the deal was pretty much done, and they eventually drive off, leaving Quinn with Reacher. Alone, Reacher speaks to Quinn and reminds him of Dominic Cole. This jogs Quinn's memory enough for Reacher to pull the trigger, just as a realization hits the man's eyes. With Quinn dead, Reacher speaks to Richard and offers him a way out of this life. He hands over the car keys and tells him to take whatever money is stashed in the house and leave, hit the road to parts unknown. This was always Richard's wish, of course, which we learned earlier in the season when they were sitting outside having ice cream together. There, Richard obviously spoke about how he always dreamed of getting away from the house, and now that the proverbial birdcage is open, he can spread his wings and fly off to parts unknown. Just before he goes though, Reacher gives him some advice, telling Richard that dwelling on the past is never a good thing. And of course the irony here is that Reacher does the exact same thing himself and has done all season long. Duffy is also moving on from her role too, and Reacher offers her a chance to take a stab at being a PI. For now though, Duffy is going to take some time to chill, but she has covered for Reacher and Neagly though, reinforcing to the ATF that they acted in self-defense and were brought in by Duffy for this case. She also reinforces to Reacher that they're just not meant to settle down together, but she does tell Reacher to keep his head down. Goodbyes are exchanged here and both Richard and Reacher hit the road, heading off in separate directions. Teresa is also free to go too, of course, and Duffy brings her back to her grandma in a touching scene. As the episode closes out, Reacher hits the road, ready for more adventures to come in season 4. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.